Reading from Angel Exterminatus, Flesh and Iron, the 23rd book of the Horus Heresy, by Graham McNeil. From Book 1, Terra Figula. In Chapter 1, Beauty and Death, Regeneration, Sentinels. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. Just a quick jump out of character. Warning. This is Halloween reading, and we are reading about Fulgrim and Fabius Bile and all the exploits of the Emperor's children in the Angel Exterminatus of Fulgrim and the Fabius Bile omnibus. These stories are not for children, and if you remember the Meraviglia, we're going there, but deeper. So, if thou dost not like military sci-fi violent stories, this is not for you. Everyone else, let's pick up partway through Book 1. Pain. It always came back to pain. Barassus's last memory had been of pain, of his life bleeding out through the broken meat puppet his flesh had become. Bones smashed beyond the ability of the apothecary to knit. Organs pulped with seismic force and the searing heat in his flesh as the fearsome power of his gene-enhanced metabolism tried in vain to undo the mortal wound done to him. The pain was intense and had never left him. But worse than the pain was the shame of how he had been wounded. Not at the hands of an enemy warrior capable of wreaking harm on a battle-engineered post-human, nor at the hands of a terrible alien creature too hideous and nightmarish for him to overcome. No, this pain had been wrought by the hands of his Primarch. The blow had been swift, too swift to avoid, and too thorough in its unmaking of his body for him to ever recover. Another had swiftly followed, an unnecessary blow, for he was already dead by any conventional measure of the word. But the Fourth Legion never did anything half-heartedly, and Perturabo's attack was that of martial philosophy distilled into two swift strikes. Gulping blood down his ruptured esophagus and frothing it out through his perforated lungs, Barassus had waited to die as he had lived, embittered and in pain. Ever since the war against the black judges and the screaming mob of hooded accusators that had caught him off guard, he had lived with pain. Individually, the accusators were no match for a warrior of the Legiones Astartes, but he had been surrounded by a dozen, each armed with a chain gavel that could cut armor apart with lethal ease. 6 died before they could touch him. But then their blows began to tell, cutting him apart piece by piece, until the tearing teeth of an enemy weapon had all but ripped through his spine. He'd killed them all with the last of his strength before falling to the ground as his legs failed him. The apothecaries had found him surrounded by their black-hooded bodies and worked wonders on his injured flesh. His body was remade and strengthened with augmentics and nerve grafts. But the pain of the ordeal never left him. That pain had been eclipsed in one moment of incautious speaking. It had been his misfortune to bring ill-favored news to the Lord of Iron, whose volatile moods had steadily worsened since the slaughters of Istvan V. He had known his news was bad, but had hoped his position as a warsmith would keep him from harm. A foolish hope, for Perturabo's rages fell on high kings and holy fools alike. Since then, blackness for the most part. Muttered voices, sudden stabbing light, and a sensation of floating, disembodied on a dark ocean. He felt dislocated, adrift and bereft of all the points of reference he had, until now, taken for granted. Barassus had tried to listen to the beat of his heart, thinking that if he could cling to that metronomic beat, then he might have some means, however transitory, of measuring the passage of time. Yet his heart was silent, and in his timeless madness, he would often wonder if he had died and was trapped in some heathen limbo. He rejected that thought, but it would return to plague him often, a nagging suspicion that his life was over, yet would not end. Memories intruded as he floated between life and death, a parade of conquest in service of the Emperor, laterally War Master Horus. He saw wars fought in the Red Rain, dug through the flesh of countless worlds, and ripped the meat from the bones of 100,000 foes. He saw righteous wars of species survival, fought by the light of Terra's sun, twisted under the transformative pressure of time, becoming wars of conquest, which in time became wars fought for the sake of the various thrill of it. When had that happened? How had the martial traditions of the Iron Warriors been perverted so completely? Barassus knew the answer well enough. Piece by piece, inch by inch, the Emperor's wars had worn the proud warriors of the 4th Legion down to little more than grinding machines, bedecked in the blood and mud of the worlds they dragged into compliance. Perturabo's warriors had done all that had been asked of them, and their only reward was to be thrown back to the very wars that were poisoning the heart of their legion. And then, the bitterest pill to swallow. Barassus remembered the words War Master Horus had spoken to the Lord of Iron after the wrack of lost Olympia, and the news that the wolves of Fenris had been loosed upon the fair Isle of Prospero. The use of force alone is a temporary solution, Horus had said. It may subdue for a moment, but it does not remove the necessity of subduing again. And the Imperium will not be at peace if we must perpetually reconquer those we have rendered compliant. You, my brother, will ensure that one conquest is enough. Perhaps the War Master's words had been intended as a balm for Perturabo's tortured soul, but so dark a benediction had only driven him deeper into abyssal guilt. What might once have appeared as the basest of treacheries now seemed like the only logical course. And Perturabo had reaffirmed his oaths of loyalty to Horus. No one knew what else had passed between these two demigods, but when the Iron Warriors had set foot on Istvan V, it was with murderous rage that could only be quenched in the blood of those they had once called brothers. Barassus floated through the chaos of the massacre on the black sand, the savage joy he had taken in the shock of betrayal on the faces of every midnight-skinned salamander and every ivory-faced raven guard. Of the Iron Hands, he had seen little, for the Phoenicians' warriors were making sport of them, their debaucheries unseemly, but effective. He remembered killing a salamander's captain with a close-range blast of his melt gun, relishing in the irony of ending his life with fire. The warrior's helmet had run molten from his face, leaving the skull exposed and his black skin as the sloth, leaving the skull exposed, like bone dripping his hot oil. Even as he died, the warrior had cursed him in a bubbling series of liquid gasps that made no sense. He left the salamander to choke on his own liquidized flesh, dismissing the curse as a vestigial remnant of his upbringing on a feral world of savage-born reptile hunters. Drifting in this timeless limbo of pain and isolation, the salamander's molten visage returned to haunt his nightmares, a leering skull with cold red eyes that bored into him with accusatory thirst. The screaming skull never left him, braying meaningless static and pressing to close his awareness, forcing him to relive the agonies it had known in its final moments. Behind the skull was another face, a bitter granite-carved mask with cold blue steel eyes, and a voice before which all else was white noise. It commanded the blackened bone of the salamander, telling it that Berossus would not die as everything else died. Even in his disembodied state, Berossus knew these were commands that could not be ignored. The salamander's skull brought life, but most of all, it brought pain. Its red eyes reducing him to scraps with chanted evocations. Berossus tried to retreat from its calls, but it had strength beyond what was left to him and a hunger for his suffering. He felt a jolt of screaming agony course through his body, a shuddering paroxysm of electric rebirth, and even as dimensions of space and form coalesced around him, he loosened a shuddering roar as he felt the immense power in his limbs. The world of darkness in which he had existed for what felt like an eternity was washed away in a cascade of painful colors that made him want to close his eyes. The colors bled away, but not his rage. And then he shook as he saw the salamander's red-eyed skull before him. Except it wasn't a salamander, and it wasn't a skull. The tech marine's eye lenses were whirring optics, enlarged orbs of clicking armatures and rotating ruby lenses mounted on a bulbous apparatus of bronze and silver. His helm was blackened iron, and a trio of hissing pneumatics crouched at his shoulders like obedient stingers of metal dripping with fluids. Who are you? He said, his voice a grating bark that sounded nothing like he remembered. I am Galleon Charon, and you are in my warforge, said the tech marine, who stepped back with a wary flinch as Berossus shook in the unbreakable fetters that bound him. Charon was looking up at him, for he was taller by far than the tech marine. Gray flesh servitors and heavy lifter gear stood around him, some before him, some behind him, though how he could see them was at present a mystery. A host of robed acolytes bearing oiled platters, upon which were a variety of cogs and gear machine parts, knelt behind Charon, the tech marine's devotees. No, not Charon's devotees. His? Why am I here? Asked Barossus, feeling unfamiliar walls of cold iron pressing in around him, a life-preserving womb and a sarcophagus all in one. Claustrophobic madness extended a tendril into his mind and found itself welcome. You are here because the Lord of Iron willed it so, said Charon. You lie, said Barossus, desperate and yet hopeful. He killed me. No. He has transformed you. I don't understand, said Barossus. By his own hand he has remade you in his image, said Charon, as one of his wheezing pneumatics reached up and took hold of a rubberized control box. At the press of a button, the fetters binding Barossus's limbs unclamped with a mechanized sound of grinding metal. His legs, twin columns of iron, steel, and fiber bundle muscles, were his again to command, and he took a ponderous step forward, knowing, with his first, that there would be no release from this entombment in an iron coffin. The sound of his splay-clawed footfalls rang from the floor, plates of the warforge with a boom of metal on metal. His arms, a monumental hammer and a heavy-barreled rotor cannon, spun in time with his thoughts. I am alive? Asked Barossus, not yet ready to believe it. Better, said Charon. You are a dreadnought. And friends, it will only get weirder from here. So, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't do Chaos Dreadnoughts for that very reason. I get it. I mean, I'm pro Dreadnought, but not for the Chaos. So, because once you go in that Dreadnought sarcophagus, you are not coming out. So, anywho, it's the month of Halloween, and we're just going to keep on reading. I think we'll jump a little bit ahead in the book next time, and then the one after that we will pick up with Mr. Fabius Bile. Until then, please like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you're having a fantastic, spooky month, and I will see you in the next one.